Hello, and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. We're trying to develop an antiviral mindset in a sick world, sailing with confidence through a sea of chaos, because believing the truth will change the way you live. We hope to help.
An antivirus mindset in a sick world.
That's right.
That's a good one.
There's a lot of viral thoughts. I keep thinking about that difference between viral and viral, right?
Between what?
Well, between the viral and viral. So viral can mean this thing went viral.
Yeah.
And meaning
quickly.
It catch on and it's spreading, which is not a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of beginning to associate it with that. That something that's just spreading and running out into the world is not, it's almost always wrong, right? Mm-hmm. If you're quick to make a judgment and then move to the next thing, you're setting yourself up to be deceived.
That gets to my question. I think I've asked you guys before, but I ask people all the time, what is a weed? And I'm interested in their answer. What do you know, and there's subjective and objective answers. There's different ways to answer it. But what I'm actually after is the idea, my own theory, is that chaos in the fall, part of understanding the fall is chaos is unrestrained.
Yeah.
And the chaos, and this gets back to a little bit of ancient Near East ideas of what chaos is, but that viral things, it's not the way it was intended to be. There was not this intent that something could metastasize so quickly and spread and overtake in a moment.
Yeah.
That normal growth is a slower process. Healthy growth is a slower process. So that viral may actually, its spreading aspect of the word could really root itself, and I think in something negative, unhealthy.
Well, and I was thinking I heard a great explanation of weeds is that weeds can grow so fast, and I think of a tomato versus something else. A weed can grow so fast because it doesn't have to build fruit.
Oh, I'd never heard that one.
Right? Therefore it can spread its leaves, it can take over, and that's a really, that makes me think of ideas too. There's a lot of fruitless ideas that are enticing, and they take over real estate, but they don't actually bring anything.
For example, is fruitless.
Well, and how much of political interest, right, that we both enjoy, is really just gossip about powerful people.
Well, and some of it you don't really know. So we won't spend any time on this, but we'll just illustrate with something we mentioned beforehand. Some of the stuff in the news recently on second thought, what we're trying to think about things. But Obama's chef dies in his waters.
And everybody jumps to all kinds of
because of the Clintons' background, a lot of deaths there. So now it's like, oh, is this the same? But the reality is we have no clue if there's fruit on this weed or not.
Right.
Zero clue. And we'll never know unless you end up in the Clinton camp and have 57 of them that are strange.
Oh my gosh.
Like that.
Yeah.
Then you might not know, but you begin to have a suspicion.
I was talking to somebody last night about, this guy was really interested in sports, right? And I was talking about how, for me, I often say politics is the sports I follow, right?
Yeah.
But trying to explain politics is like, it's 90% preseason games, which means that most of it's mostly nothing.
Yeah.
It's mostly meaningless. You're not keeping a record even.
Yeah. All the polls out, all the things now. 2024 is a long way away.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I just read an article just recently. Some guy saying, let's hold on here. Let's go back to 2016, and a year and a half out, who we thought were going to be the people were not the people.
Yeah.
So
every time.
It's all the time that way.
Yeah.
And there's some when there's an incumbent and whatnot that you don't know, but
the Iowa caucus is in January, and so what I heard somebody saying is, people in Iowa are not paying attention to the presidential candidates through the summer.
Yeah.
They're going camping
this summer.
They're taking break.
Yeah.
It's when kids get back to school. So now people are saying that this is actually when Iowa starts to matter. Like the campaign is really kicking off.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't, as a candidate, if you weren't forgotten over the summer, you're in a good place. That's the goal is just to not be forgotten. All right. Speaking of presidential.
Yes, I was just going to go there.
We talked last week. You made a prediction that Gavin Newsom
I'm sticking with that
prediction.
Would
be the next president of the United States, assuming Joe Biden survives to end his term.
I'm not assuming that's true.
Because otherwise it's automatic, right? So there's been an update.
Say that again? What do you mean otherwise it's automatic?
Well, Kamala would take over.
Yeah.
So we're saying if the only way that Newsom...
You think if he were to pass away suddenly, Kamala took over, that she would be the incumbent running?
Well, I think they're not necessarily, but she would be the next president.
That's true, and she'd have the right to run.
She would have
but I'm
more
telling
to
you,
wield
she'd
at that
get
point.
an in-party opposition, like Reagan opposed Ford.
Yeah.
And he loses, and then he runs the next year, wins. But I think she would be opposed, and I think she would lose. They do not want her as president.
That's a
They do not
tough
want her.
prediction. We're going to assume that even if he died, they'd keep him alive until the end of the term.
Yeah, that's right. A
With
little
whatever
we can
masked robot
Okay,
is
what
running
did you
his.
see in the news? I saw something in the news that supported my thing. You did. I think we may have seen.
Okay, so what I
different
saw
things.
was DeSantis agreed to do a debate
I saw that.
with Newsom on Sean Hannity.
Oh, I didn't know it was agreed. I knew it was thrown
I think
out
they
there.
both. I think
Okay.
they both agreed,
Okay.
but it was because it was hitting the news that way. But to me, that would be like the real debate.
I know.
Because if Trump's not going to debate DeSantis, Biden's not going to debate anybody.
Well, I'm not going to say the real. I probably won't follow you there on the real debate because
the shadow campaign.
it may be the real because you don't know health-wise Trump, et cetera, and you don't know a lot of things about Trump. But I mean, you have to say he's the front runner by a huge margin. Something would have to change for DeSantis to be the valid candidate. And it's not even sure that
if he's in jail.
because Vivek is
Vivek.
Vivek.
Vivek. He said it
Vivek.
rhymes with cake.
Vivek. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Vivek. His fundraising has begun to pass DeSantis. Very intriguing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
he's not ideological in that sense.
Yeah.
He's a
So
practical
yeah,
guy.
so they agreed to a debate. I didn't know that. Yes, that is a support for my idea. Here's the support I saw. Quietly, Newsom's group set up there's certain timelines you have to do to be able to run for president.
Okay, right. To get your name on the ballot and
Yep,
such.
that's the thing, to get
Yeah.
your name on. And so there's like these three different kinds of groups. You have to be able to raise money a certain way. You have to have PACs that aren't technically not for you, but they'll spend money on things that support you. And
Are these rules made up by the Democrat Party
I don't know.
or by
I don't know.
individual states? Because I
don't
wouldn't think
remember.
states would have those.
No,
kind of
I don't
rules.
think it's states. I don't know if it's federal or the party.
I know the parties
Because the
often
party
have
will bend
rules
their own
around.
rules.
Yeah, especially. Yeah, that's probably true of both. But the parties will often have rules about who gets to be in the debate. You have to have this many
Yes, right.
donations from this
Yes,
many
that's
people
right, that's
in this
right,
many
that's
states.
Right,
Yeah.
right. This I gathered was federal law. That would be my supposition.
Okay.
And he quietly put these three groups together recently, even though he's not announced.
Yeah.
And so it's all hush hush under the radar. I shouldn't say hush hush.
Yeah.
It's under the radar. It's like, dude, he's setting this up to be ready.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
anyway, I'm sticking with my
stay
prediction.
tuned for more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love languages.
Love languages. All right. So I had this a funny post someone put, and I echoed it, and I'm interested in your thoughts. It says, "This is Brian. I don't know how to say his last name. Salve. He's a Christian pastor, I believe. He says the whole love languages thing is funny. Something like 98% of men are words of affirmation and physical touch, and 98% of ladies, this is wording, are acts of service and quality time." And he said it's just men and women. And so you're just describing men and women. And when I posted it, I immediately had a couple of commenters saying, well, we're exceptions. Like, that's not how me and my husband are, or that's not how I am.
Yeah.
Right. And so we were talking about
80-20.
We were talking about men and women.
Yeah.
And how there's overlap.
Yeah.
There's real overlap between what you would call a personality that's masculine versus feminine.
Yeah.
And usually what we see in popular culture are the extremes of either one. And our culture has become more extreme lately to where the hyper-masculine and the hyper-feminine are gaining like positions of influence more and more. And the normal people sort of feel left out, which I think is actually perpetuating some of the transgender ideology.
When you say hyper, are you talking about
Mostly
hyper-mas-
physiological features,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
That
and
women
then
are
the
getting
sexualized
even
women
surgeries.
and-
It used to be you'd
Yeah,
get
yeah.
a breast enhancement, and that's about the extent of what you're going to, maybe
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
liposuction.
Yeah.
But now it's implants and
Yeah.
hips and butts and
Yeah, yeah.
lips and it's
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
And it's all to exaggerate
Yeah.
the curves, the feminine,
Yeah.
right? And what I heard, I heard somebody talking about Chloe Cole is a well-known detransitioner who, as a teenager, she didn't, she was looking at these cultural images of femininity and looked at herself in the mirror and said, "That's not me." And so that made her ripe for the picking, as far as, well, maybe that means you're really a man.
Yeah.
Let's put chemicals in your body and give you surgeries as a teenager that are totally irreversible.
Yeah.
And so the reality is there's truth behind it. Like, there are these averages of men and women.
Yeah.
They're not extremes.
Yeah.
So I heard a statistic, I could be getting the numbers wrong, but the idea is the same, that the average man, like 10% of women are as masculine as the average man.
10% of women are as masculine. Okay.
And 10% of men are as feminine as the average woman.
Yeah.
There's a pretty significant overlap.
Yeah.
And so we say, well, it leans this way, it leans that way, but it always leads you to say, well, am I not masculine enough? What does masculine even mean?
Yeah.
This is an age-old conversation. But I think what's happened in the past is there have been some traditional accepted definitions that we say, no, we figured this out already. We don't need to discuss it. And then people feel things about that decision, but that's how it is. And now everything's up in the air, which is kind of what I mean when I say a sea of chaos. It's like you can be on the surface of the ground and the surface of the water, and the difference is the surface is changing all the time in the water. And that's what it feels like our culture has ended in.
And then if you throw in the wrinkles of, we are, some have called it an Oprahization of our culture, or feminization, but Oprah. So that your 10% might be a larger number.
Well,
right?
I think that ideologies drive people toward
feminine.
extremes.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of women, my mom tells the story, and this is from the 80s. When we were little, she felt shame that she would not have a career because she had heard from relatives, from teachers, from the culture at large, that a woman staying home is like wasted talent.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think. Like, I would think a woman going to work is wasted talent in a lot of situations, because how much more valuable is it to raise kids, to create a home and a family that's stable and loving and healthy? Because everybody's got a story of how crazy their home was growing up, or if you don't, you're considered abnormal. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that was the cost, because what job can you get that's going to bring more meaning than investing in a family,
or your own personal, what is important to you?
And it's so commonly spoken to men, right? The message of, when you die, you'll never regret that you didn't work more.
Yeah.
But then the message to women is the exact opposite. Like, that you should regret not working more.
Yeah.
Or the other lie, which is you can have everything. You can be the best mom ever and work 50 hours a week. Like, that's just not possible. You can't.
Yeah.
And one of the things I tell my boys is, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. There's a cost to every choice you make.
Yeah.
And that's just the way things are.
Yeah, and things change too. So, for example, our kids, I was at their births, all 5 of our kids. But there was a time when that was unheard of. Men aren't a part of that process. Well, they are waiting out, pacing nervously,
But how long did that era actually last? In other words, like what I think of as
Which era?
Well, there's the modern medicine. You're not allowed in the room, right? The birth takes place at the hospital. Everything is sort of anesthetized and sterilized.
Yeah, I think that was a blip.
That didn't last that long,
no.
Right? Yeah. But if you went 200 years ago, there's a midwife.
Probably
the husband's still outside.
Yeah, he's outside.
Right?
Yeah.
But part of that is the feminine kind of mystique and the like, this is not your business kind of sense.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But the hard part I have is when I go in my mind, when I go farther back than the 50s and what I think of as hospitals for the last 80 years, the next step back is like the Victorian era. And I think that's mostly created by movies and shows about, Downton Abbey and all those people. I don't really have a strong sense of what was it like for people living in America in 1890.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mostly farms or you're in a slum city, right? What was that life like?
Well, let's just put it pre-industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Because that then overlaps for thousands of years.
Right.
It was
Yep.
the same. And so that's part of our problem. We've had rapid change over the last 150 years, rapid change.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I think that men were not, there was a more distinct, and men were not a part of that in that was a women's thing, both in the pre-industrial revolution and all the way back to what I've read in the ancient Near East.
So do you think it's better now that you were there than that you wouldn't be?
I wouldn't call it a better. I felt it was better. I wanted to be there.
Yeah.
But I think that's a subjective experience. That's a subjective analysis.
Well, and I felt like my role in the birthing room was to be the like coach / support, like to help her endure the suffering with a voice of calm, a voice of reason. Like I was very close in the sense of like face to face, by her ear, coaching her through it, saying. But I
so your
think if
two
I
words
wasn't
are
there,
you have two trigger words there: coaching.
yeah.
You who've never given birth are coaching.
Oh yeah.
And then what was the other one you said?
We can get into this.
The voice of reason.
Yeah.
Assuming now
In the midst of pain, reason is easily lost. But I don't mind triggering anybody about those things. And we could talk about coaching. I'm going to hold a finger for that.
Okay.
But if I was not in that room, right? If we went back 200 years and it was like, you stay out,
Yeah.
I absolutely would have been replaced by supportive women
Yes, that's right.
who were experts in birth,
That's right.
right? Mothers, aunts,
Yeah, that's
sisters
right. That's right.
in that room.
That's right.
And I think there is something lost by introducing men
that's
into
what
a
I think
space that should be
That's what I think too.
mysterious and treasured, right?
Yeah.
The act of birth.
So, have you read The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis?
No.
Four Loves? You really should. It's exceptional. Anyway, he talks about the 4 Greek words for love. And one of the things he says in there is that friendship, he's talking about friendship love. And then he
Phileo.
talks about phileo, men and women. And he says, here's the thing though, too. I can really only talk to you about male friendship. Because if we're anything like, I know in a group of guys, as soon as a girl is there, we're all a little different.
Right.
And he goes, I'm only assuming that as soon as I join a group of women, that they may all be a little different too.
Absolutely.
But I don't have any idea.
How would you know?
Clue.
Right.
How would you know?
There's a quantum physics about it. Right. The
And
observer
I think
impacts the
that's a
outcome.
real thing. And I do think that as much as it was good that I was there, my wife and I were on the same page and all of this, I also think there's a potential that I just am not able to perceive that there was a loss as well.
Yeah.
And that the other way of doing things had its own value, and maybe more, maybe less, it doesn't even matter. It just had its own.
Yeah.
And it was good. So,
Okay, I want to talk about coaching really quick before we move on.
all right.
And this is the idea that you don't need to be an expert in something to coach someone in it.
Okay.
In fact, sometimes it can help. Because the role of the coach is not to give technique necessarily. Many times the performer who needs the coach has the technique, but is faced with distraction and discouragement. And so the role of the coach is to discern what's distraction and what's priority beforehand, and then maintain it through the performance. Then also to watch the performer's ability to manage their stress, their emotions, their they're like, this isn't going well. So hold on to the vision for a positive future. And a lot of times, and I think this is true of all leadership, your job is to bring out the best in them as a human, whatever the thing is that they're trying to perform in, whatever the venue.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to be, and my example for that as a school principal, I was a teacher, a math teacher in science, middle and high school. I became a school principal at elementary. And math and science are secondary priorities in elementary. Reading is the thing. And I don't know how to teach reading. Like, I know how to read, but there's a lot more to that thing. And I learned it pretty quick that I was in over my head in as far as the skills required, the techniques. But I could still lead a staff of teachers by drawing out of them the expertise and helping guide them in the questions of what's the right next step.
Yeah. So I'm in agreement with you. The way I would phrase it is this: the word coaching has a wider semantic range. And it includes both. It includes those areas that are instructional, in which you do need prior experience, but it also includes areas in which your levels of encouragement may not be as technical in the area of what they're doing. And so I agree with you That doesn't mean, though, that somebody wouldn't have heard you said that and have glamped onto the former in order to roast you.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
I don't mind being roasted, but
Yeah.
but part of it too is
And it's almost like
I think
it
our
would be
role as
nice,
husbands.
given the arguments of today, it would be nice either to fight really hard to regain the semantic range for coaching, or to have an alternative word. Because you don't want to confuse the two. You don't want to unnecessarily offend somebody.
Well, so as a coach, though, there are times where I will have, like, just because I can't give birth doesn't mean I don't know what it means to endure pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can hone in on that with skills to present, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The other side of it is when I think of the sports metaphor that coaching creates. As a husband, I see my role. If I become just another player, a teammate, I think I'm not doing well, right? Maybe I could think of myself as the team captain within my marriage. So which is closer to a coach than, than just a standard teammate. But I think I've gone way wrong also if I become the referee.
Yeah.
Where I'm just calling fouls and my wife is not performing right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people hear a coach, but they envision in marriage, especially referees calling balls and strikes or umpires.
You know where this distinction is important? It is important in our day. There's two things it makes me think of. Number one, I've often wondered, but I've never really been asked. So when I was pastoring for a long time, as a man, how can you, the objection of our culture would be, how can, if men are to be pastors, which is the position I hold,
and the Bible agrees.
Then how can you talk to women when you've never experienced what they've experienced? And then recently I read an exchange.
This is sort of the viewpoint discrimination idea that, like, you as a white man, how
That's
can you
where I was just going to
speak
go.
to?
There was a teachers conference and a black guy who's doing a DEI thing, and somebody objected, and it came down to the presenter is black, and the guy who objected, out of the 500 people listening, he happened to be white. And he basically wrote him off, says, you've never been black, you don't get to have an opinion.
Right.
And that's a fallacy. That's
and everybody in the room
false.
accepts it.
They're all silent because whether they accept it or not, they don't want to make a...
Well, your silence is acceptance on some level.
Well,
I mean, maybe not in
would
that
disagree
venue,
with that,
but broadly speaking.
Because that's also saying your silence about... that's the same argument that says... if you're silent in racial matters, then you're a racist. Or if you're silent in not standing up for gay rights, then you are. You know, the silence issue, I don't think is necessarily support because you remain silent. It can be.
Well, I think I don't know who the
is.
quote is from, but, all it takes for evil to triumph is good men to do nothing.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that, so I think we've got a lot more good men doing nothing.
Okay.
Than we need.
That's fine, but then you take each individual good man or each individual man. You can't say because you did nothing in this situation that you're letting evil triumph, because you have to leave each man to his own. He has to act before
to his
God.
own conscience, right?
Yeah,
and
so the maxim works on a macro level.
That's right. I agree with that.
Yeah. Love things. Personality tests. Do you want to say anything about personality tests on that line?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of people getting. You're talking about going back to the love languages.
Yeah,
Are love languages a personality?
No, but it's of
it feels the same,
kind,
doesn't it?
I've often had this thought and observation.
Yeah.
There's value in almost every test. I think is intriguing, but they're never thorough. Never. And there's always against type. They never explain enough. And so whether you're Myers-Briggs, whether you do the disc thing, it doesn't matter, all the different, the cholerics and phlegmatic stuff, they speak some truth, but there's holes. It's like Swiss cheese. They're
I
all
always
riddled with
feel
inconsistency.
like I'm listening to a horoscope when I hear those things.
Oh, see, I really like them. I don't
in
have
the sense
that
of
response.
like, oh, you're one of those.
No, I love them actually.
Oh, Sagittarius, of course, right? And it's like
Sagittarius.
Yeah.
Now,
so
are you,
what
you
I
are
think
familiar
is,
with the difference between horoscope and zodiac?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I think of in terms of the love languages, and I think most personality tests key on this, and this is where they go wrong, is that we all have all the love languages. So to say, well, my love language is an automatic error. Because what I think would be more accurate, one, I don't think there's 5, but to be more accurate would be to say, this is the type of love I appreciate right now.
Yeah.
I might
yeah.
appreciate some other type
Yeah,
another day.
circumstantially driven is important.
And so there's experience, there's habit, there's like, well, my dad and mom, they showed me love this way, and now that's what I equate with love.
I know.
I've had students say, I don't think anyone cares about me unless they yell at me. Adults don't care unless they're angry.
Oh, that gets in the whole question of how
So
abuse
is that
gets
love language?
wrapped into love.
And this kid wasn't describing abuse, but simply that if you're not mad, you don't care. Like, because emotion equals care.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
a common conversation within marriage.
Yeah.
Like, what you're so emotional about your football, but then we sit down to talk and it's like your emotions go to 0. Why? Why
Yeah.
don't you care?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good segue. I'm going to make another observation about mourning.
Okay.
Blessed are those who mourn.
Yep.
So I'm talking to my wife and I are visiting with some friends, and they've had a big fight. Right? They've been married more years than we have. They had a big fight, so they turn and look
How
to
big
us.
was this fight? Or it just happened to be fresh and you were talking about it?
It was fresh, and it was one of their bigger ones. So I'll make a statement that came out in this session. My wife and I have probably 2 to 3 fights that we've had for 30 years now. And it takes in various forms. And this was one of theirs that they've had their entire marriage.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yep.
So it was big, but it was the same big that they've been having for 45 years. In any case, it is fresh. That's probably the better way to say it. Like you said, it was fresh. So we're talking about it, and so we're lounging on their couch. They're talking, and in one sense, they begin to relitigate the matter in front of us, right?
Yeah, right.
Which is interesting, and you learn.
It can be quite awkward unless you're really good friends with them.
Yeah, we're good friends with them, so it wasn't awkward. But it's actually an opportunity to bite your tongue and just keep listening. Listening. And the benefit to that is, even if you had a valid observation early on, the benefit to listening is you have germination of thoughts. And here's what happened in this thing. I all of a sudden, because she has a point, and she has some validity in her point, in my opinion. He has a point, and he has some validity in his thing. And what's happening is, Warfield once said this: the reason theological controversies stay thousands of years or hundreds and centuries is because both sides, a side in a controversy, never feel like their itch is really being scratched.
Yeah.
When they hear the other side.
Like, you're not really giving validity to my side.
Yeah, you're not hearing my concern. I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm not sure if I buy it or not buy it. And so Warfield, in the context, was talking even about Calvinism and Arminianism and the role of the human will and God's sovereignty. And he said, but the one position will held out and just say, when you explain your side, you don't really give credence to this thing that I think is important and seems to be in Scripture. And the other side says it back. And that always has stuck with me. Unresolved arguments are an itch that's not been scratched.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, I'm listening to these two, and what I realized is we have the same ones, my wife and I. And in fact, on the drive over to see these friends, we had one of those arguments also. It wasn't big, but it was one of the 3 topics.
Yeah.
And so here's what I ended up responding to them. And it was a little revelatory. I think it was insightful from the perspective of thinking about mourning. Blessed are those who mourn. And I thought, you know what? I don't think the solution is to figure this out. You've been going 45 years. I don't think you're ever going to figure this out.
That's right.
Because you are both holding on to something that is true, and you're blind to something that is not true.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to resolve that. If you do resolve it, it's probably not going to be real. It's going to be one partner is completely giving up ground, which in some places that's the right thing.
Yeah.
But there are other things and it's not necessarily right to do that. And so I thought, this is another example. Blessed are those who mourn. And here's what I ended up saying to them, and I actually said it to myself. The reality is, what this is an opportunity to mourn in your own marriage. Right? This is where these things come up.
Because the end of mourning is acceptance.
And
you need to accept that that's how they are.
Well, it is acceptance, but before you get there, it looks to God, because I can't fix this.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up saying about the whole thing about mourning is that the circumstance that makes you mourn points you to the general brokenness of the world. And you just have to look to God.
Well,
And
that's
that puts
tricky
you
though,
in-
because sometimes you mourn because of an unmet expectation that has nothing to do with the brokenness of the world. You're just being a little bit spoiled. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? I wanted my cookie and I didn't get a cookie, and now I'm sad. And that doesn't mean the sadness isn't real, but it is kind of grounded in a selfish belief.
Okay, I agree with
So
you.
mourning
but
isn't always
I
legitimate.
could
Do
take
you know
a
what I'm
devil's
saying?
advocate. Well, I could make it legitimate. Take the cookie.
Okay, yeah.
In
In
an
heaven, you get
unfall-
all the cookies you want.
That's exactly right.
I don't think so.
I do. In heaven, I think every desire is fulfillable. And
Ooh,
if it's
okay.
not fulfillable in this moment, you're okay with it in the next moment.
But that
The
assumes
problem
that
with
every
the cookie-
desire is without sin, the desire itself. But tons of desires are selfish and
Well, I
sinful.
think in an unfallen world, you would not have a desire. That
So
would
those
be
desires would
have sin.
dissipate.
Well, okay, I don't know which desires you're talking about.
Well, you said every desire can be fulfilled.
Yes.
But I'm saying I have a lot of desires
Okay,
that are
let's throw out another
selfish and
thing.
corrupt, right?
What if I said I don't selfish and corrupt desire? Maybe I'm just going to run with something here until it's shown to be.
Yeah,
inerrant.
we're wrestling. I like it.
Is there any new desire, or are there only corrupted good ones? Is there a bad desire that is new to the sin-fallen world, or are all desires corruptions of the good?
Okay. So something I've accepted, and maybe you can confirm or deny, is that all emotions are morally neutral. And so what you're saying, I think, is desires are also, you desire something, it's just that maybe it's been corrupted, maybe it's being expressed wrong, but deep down there's a purity to desire. Is that what you're saying? Similar to
I think those are two different things.
no, they
So
are,
the-
but
the
I'm
latter-
putting them in the same category.
I know. I'm not sure if I believe all emotions are neutral. So that's
Ooh,
the first
okay.
thing. But the second one is, yes, I agree. All desires, I believe, all sinful desires are corruptions of what would have been healthy, unfallen desires.
There's,
so the
there's
wanting
scripture
the
about
cookie.
this that I'm not jumping to mind, but I know is out there.
All right. The cookie. The
Yeah.
selfishness is a distortion of a desire for good, which is a good thing. The selfishness is the good isn't here this moment. Now I'm going to be angry about this.
Sure.
In an unfollowed world, the desire for the cookie is fine. If the cookie's not present in the moment, in the unfallen world, you'll wait till it will be present, or you're not made angered by that.
Yeah.
Which is, in essence, all these things are angry with God, is what they are. All sin is traceable back to against God, which is
Yeah.
why I think David can say, "Against you only have I sinned."
Yeah.
It's relatively speaking, because he certainly sinned against Uriah and Bathsheba, right?
Well, I mean, if the person against whom you sinned is now dead, you can just say, well, I only sinned against. No.
But I think he's tracing it down to at the root, this is really what this is about. When you plumb any sin against another person, you have to address it with them. But the core of that is
So then
it's
all
God that
mourning, every expression of grief is is holding God to account for the world he didn't make in the way you wished he had.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Because you said all anger is against God fundamentally.
No. Oh, well, no, not all anger. I said all sins are against God fundamentally.
Right. I
And
thought
then
right before
the
that you
instance
were
was
saying
that anger was the sin because I don't have a cookie. So I got mad, I didn't have a cookie. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's a distorted use of anger in that moment.
Yeah.
It's not needed for no cookie.
But I mean, if you're 2 years old, anger that you didn't get a cookie is a pretty normal thing.
That's true.
Yeah.
Your
But
world
how
is
much
small.
how much of our anger from God's perspective is like that? He looks and says, "Oh, these 2-year-olds."
Well, I think that's
Such-
exactly. I think we are the children of God, and we don't take it literally enough. And the
yeah.
way that we think of our own children, especially in their 0 to 10 years, that's how we would be healthier if we would think of ourselves that way before God.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
though that's not entirely true, we're not that, but there would be an overall healthierness for us, I think, if we treated ourselves that way and embraced our follies, embraced the irrationality of our selfishness, our temper tantrums.
So part of what you would do if you were doing that successfully, thinking that way, is you would kind of step back from your emotional reaction to things and say, with humility,
Yeah.
like, this is a little thing.
That's right. That's
Right.
what you'd want to get your 8-year-old kid to realize about the cookie.
Absolutely.
You would not berate him for having the desire
Or the emotion,
or the emotion for it. Or wait, which emotion are you talking about?
even the anger.
Yeah, see,
I would
okay.
step back from the anger and say, okay, because here's how I think about emotions, right? That emotions are the product of your belief about reality interacting with reality.
Okay.
And so when reality disappoints your belief or they come in conflict, you feel things.
Okay.
So therefore, the belief is at fault, not the emotion.
Okay, yes. Okay, so if we're going to go that angle, then I agree. The anger in the moment is not necessarily, it's the proper use of anger.
Right.
The error in it is what is the reality that should command anger.
And the
And that I
more,
don't have a cookie is not enough. There's more reality that should say, be happy.
well, and the problem when your son or daughter is angry they didn't get a cookie is that they believe they are owed one.
Yes, that's
And
right.
that's what you actually need to get at.
Yeah.
Now, you can also coach them, right? We're coaching again, on how to calm down.
Yeah.
Let's turn our brain back on. Let's let our
here's the
body settle
thing.
in.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the
kid-
problem. The problem
Yeah.
is the selfish belief.
Yes. And the problem, I think, with the kid is their rational faculties are not such that you can go to a lot of levels about that belief
It's going to
system.
vary by age a lot.
So I remember counseling with a young lady. She actually ended up taking her life. But she felt things deeply, and suffering, it hurt her.
Yeah, she suffered immensely.
She suffered, and she saw suffering in a lot of places. And so one of the conversations we had a lot was, I decided, at first I was trying to stand against her taking that suffering and concluding things about God. But I abandoned that after a while and decided to let that be and argue instead she wasn't thinking big enough. So I said yes to every evil she wanted to mention. That's
Yeah.
true.
Right.
And then I made the case, but you're not listening to all of reality speak. You're only hearing the voice of suffering and its conclusions. And if that was all there was, I agree with you. But there's another elements of reality.
But she couldn't see it.
Well, she could at times, and that was the fight.
Right.
And so, because we had friends whose baby died, and this is the sermon I preached. There's no answer to this, I said.
Yeah.
There's no answer to this baby dying. There's one answer that God gives. And he says, I want you to look at my son, Jesus, that I nailed him on a cross. And I want you to see that the evil I've endured and initiated is bigger than yours, and someday I'll answer yours. But for now, I want you to look at mine, and I want you to hear me saying, I'm good. Don't just look at the death of your baby and conclude, I'm not good. If that was the only reality point you had to argue, that's the right conclusion.
Yeah.
But it's not the only reality point. And so, there's there's blue skies and flowers, and there's sunshine.
Yeah. The rain falls on the just and
That's
the
right.
unjust.
There's all these reality points that argue. And so what I think suffering does, which gets us to the morning, suffering makes a case, and it presents its evidence. And if it's the only evidence admitted into the case, often it's an airtight case.
Right.
But there is more evidence to be submitted. There are these good things, and then the ultimate evidence is that God says, I'm aware of this broken thing.
So to me, that would signal, it reminds me of the phrase, fight the good fight of the faith, in the sense that where the battleground is around how you are interpreting the evidence.
That's exactly right.
Because faith interprets the evidence.
That's right.
In the face of evil.
That's what faith does.
In
It
the face
sees
of
the
evil,
other
God is
evidence.
good.
That's right, because it's seeing more evidence.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And that's, I think, the dilemma with the 8-year-old kid who wants a cookie. It's hard to get him to see those things. The mind of the 8-year-old has a more difficult time getting to the abstract arguments.
But I think the solution is also counter evidence. So in other words, as a dad, my solution to him is to go get close. We're going to calm down together. I'm going to establish authority in this environment that keeps you safe even from yourself and your selfish desires. And then that becomes the counter evidence that in the face of grief, he is with me.
That's true. That's
right?
true.
Because
That's
God's
like God.
solution is, no matter what, I'll be with you.
I'm going to draw near. And I'm not
Yeah.
going to answer all these individual ones right now.
Well,
I'm
the
right
answer
here.
is because, and I think of the end of Job. God's answer is, here I am. You don't get an answer. I'm with you.
Yes, that's
In the
right.
face of the presence of God, Job's questions are no more. They
He's
become
willing to
insignificant.
set them aside.
Right? He says, I'm woe to
Yep.
me, I'm undone. I don't remember
yeah.
the phrasing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so that, I think, is always the answer is you don't get an answer, which is what you're saying. It's unanswerable. Why did this baby die? But God is with us.
Yeah.
Right.
And so where the point I started from is mourning, even in a marriage. I think there's a legitimacy, this argument that's 30 years old between my wife and I, 45 years old between this couple.
Yeah.
Is there a role for mourning to come in and say, you don't have to fix this. You have to get along. You have to be able to set things aside and move forward, but you don't have to resolve this argument. You're never going to. How about put it in the category of blessed are those who mourn?
Correct.
Someday you'll be comforted, God knows, and you can just say, it's a sorrow of the world that here this person I love more than anyone in the world. If we really start to go at it on this topic, man, we start getting hateful. We
Right.
start getting so mad.
Resentment.
And we don't want to go there. So instead of saying, well, I've got to fix it, well, you got to resolve the, no. Let's just leave it as we can't.
So
and it's sad. But God will fix it someday.
I've been thinking about the grief cycle too much lately, so I keep bringing it up, but I think it connects. And that is that we waver between negotiation and anger, is what I hear you describing.
Negotiation and anger, okay?
That, okay, I can fix this, right? Let's get into negotiation
Yeah.
with this spouse, this
yeah.
woman that God gave me,
Yeah.
mimicking Adam in the garden, right?
Yeah.
And then that doesn't work. So now we're up to anger. But then instead of going from anger to a genuine sadness, to an accepting things as they are, we bump back into, and that's how we get stuck, is that cycle of negotiation and anger.
Yeah.
And so you can look across the table at this person that God gave you and say, no, in fact, there is a grief, right? I'm going to stop being angry. I'm going to let the sadness come. And then I'm going to say, this is now how it is.
Maybe that's a way to, your grief cycle idea there is that mourning is what concludes those things.
You have to let the mourning
You have
come.
to come to mourning because mourning allows you to say this is really bad and it really hurts, but you end up looking up to God and say, someday I'm waiting for you to fix these kinds of things.
That's right. And
I'll
that
wait for that day.
is how you manage a spouse, right?
Yeah.
You don't manage a spouse.
Yeah, that's right.
You look at them as they are with hope that they could be
Well,
better.
the thing is,
but giving it away
you're in it too.
because they see
right?
the same in you.
That's right. So the mourning is, I think my wife misses something that I'm not willing to let go of, and I'm going to be willing to say she's seeing something that I can't let go of and see.
Right.
And I'll call it even and just mourn. It's sad that we can't have a more united life together. And that's what it is. That's mourning.
Yeah.
There's what it is.
That's good.
All right,
We keep
what do you
mining
got?
that depth. I keep thinking we're going to run out of stuff in there. and then
I know.
and we get
Same
more
with
stuff.
me.
All right, I have a little one. There's a video that I won't post of one of these transgender activist guys who goes on TikTok and makes videos for kids. And I saw the video posted by a group on Twitter called Gays Against Groomers.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of that group.
I have, yeah.
But they're openly gay. I wouldn't say they're conservative folks, but it's sort of saying, look, even the gays think these guys are too far, right?
Yeah. This is like Stalin and Roosevelt being friends in the war.
Yeah, kind of. Okay,
Strange bedfellows.
so this activist put out a video talking about something called xenopronouns. So the pronoun
Xenopronouns.
there's sort of a bleeding edge of pronoun stuff that gets crazier and crazier, right? And it feels like it's a lot of kids trying to define their own space, define themselves, to see how far they can push the people in their lives to not just accept but to obey, right? With these demands of self-definition. So this latest one, they're called xenopronouns, and what xeno means alien, right? He describes them as poetic, spiritual, and beautiful because they cannot be pronounced or explained.
Okay.
So it immediately
It's like
immediately
using
made me
X.
think of the name of God, he who shall not be named. Like it's too holy, and so much of this self-definition impulse to me feels like I'm putting myself in every way that I can think of what God is like. I will put myself in that place.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that sparks any thoughts for you.
It does. I just read an article, actually a woman asserting that the AI movement is Babel, is a Tower of Babel.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are trying to create in our own image, we are trying to be godlike
Yeah.
and make sentient beings. And their point was not the Alexa or Siri or whatever. Their point was the robots that are being made with facial features.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to mimic human emotion. And it's an interesting point. It is an interesting point in the sense that I've often wondered about the Tower of Babel in these terms. What God did at that time, we read this story and we try to understand it, but it seems as if we've counteracted that. So English is a worldwide language.
Yeah.
And then if you get to technology, it's a worldwide resolver. The world communicates together now.
Yeah.
What is this, a foiling of God's Babel?
Yeah.
Confusion of language. Have we overcome it? And if so, does that mean God just says, okay, well, it took him a while? Or does he Babel again?
Well, I think if you look through history, so I read it, there's a phenomenal book I would recommend called There's Two Trees in the Garden, written by Rick Joyner. And he talks about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, right? And that the symptoms of someone who's repeatedly returning to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that they're always trying to ascend to heaven like Satan. They're always trying to be like God without God's help, which is the temptation that Eve succumbed to, right?
Yeah.
That God is not good. He's withholding the good from you.
He's withholding good,
And
yeah.
that in particular, the good he's withholding is that you can be like him. And so that complex little draw is built into so many things, and technology falls into it, right? Which I always rejected the idea that it's just blanket knowledge. It's not knowledge that God withheld. It's the knowledge of good and evil. It's a moral frame in particular. But there does seem to be this technology linked in the Old Testament all the way to our modern experience. So I feel like the jury's still out on that. But the other side of it is he was looking through history at this impulse to build a Tower of Babel. What he said was that when you're eating from this tree, you'll start building towers. And he lists in the Bible Peter on the Mount of Transfiguration, who says, we need to build a tabernacle. Like, this is too good. And God immediately rebuking him in that moment, in that holy place, that you need to listen to Jesus. In other words, don't start eating from that tree. The tree of life is right here. Stay focused. And that then what Rick Joyner claims is that another great evidence in history, in church history, is the Protestant Reformation. That when the church was reaching this height of saying, we will, ascend to heaven within these cathedrals of Europe, what comes from that is a total division. That God's answer to a Tower of Babel is dividing. And the dividing hasn't stopped within the church, right? How many denominations in the Protestant movement are there? Thousands. And so I always now look when I think, okay, like you're saying, because I've had the same thought, we're approaching this Babel moment where it's not just one city or one nation, it's now like the world. Division's coming.
Yeah.
And that's the answer of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other side of that is that the miraculous sign of speaking in tongues, speaking in the languages of all the peoples of the world, is God's answer to the Tower of Babel. In that every tongue, every language is preserved, right? The Bible is very clear that God wants every nation reached, that every nation will be blessed. He's not dissolving the nations. But he is unifying them under his kingdom, but yet keep maintaining their distinction. But so when the church begins, all the languages are heard. And so God's saying, look, even though all the languages are heard, my power will resolve the division that those languages create. And so God has an answer to Babel, and man is trying to get their own.
Yeah. Because, the new humanity. He's making new humanity without division.
Yeah.
Interesting phrase you did there, uniting them under his kingdom.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the church? Because, see, I don't see that. I don't.
Well, I
and
see
this
every
gets to our
nation
other conversation.
Every nation and language will be present in heaven.
Yes, but that's
so
not
in
the
that
same
way
as
they're united.
Okay.
The peoples,
Okay.
not necessarily the governments.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's what I heard. That's
Right.
That's what I heard. You didn't say governments, but peoples. I thought of this earth. Yeah, of the world. No. Yes, he's drawing them all, but even uniting them, they're now one. There's no barrier between them. the element of division is no more, right? So even though they're people from tribe, languages, and nations,
Yeah.
when they come into the kingdom, they are one people.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right.
But in the same way that if you are in a healthy family, you will feel completely united with the members of that family,
but have your own
but
identity.
you will be you.
Yeah.
You'll never stop thinking. I heard somebody saying, and this is a Brene Brown quote, and I have mixed feelings about her work, but she said that the opposite of feeling as though you belong, which is I think what we're trying to describe, right? In heaven, you'll feel as though you belong. You'll know. The opposite of that is trying to fit in. Because even if you succeed at fitting in, you've adjusted yourself to the setting.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is a difference.
Yeah.
An important difference.
Okay, let me ask you a question. I've been meaning to ask for a while.
Okay.
How would you define normal? In its current, you have this woke ideology, and then there's this term being used, the normals. How would you define
like normies.
that? Normies, okay.
Normies, like this is the red pill culture, normies.
Okay.
Your normie friends, that's what I hear. I hear that phrase, right?
Okay. How would you, I'm not sure if your normie means something different than normal, but
kind of.
How would you define it? How would you describe it? What is a normal person? Whether the lingo version or what is normal? We're in an abnormal time, right?
Yeah.
We're living in something's deeply wrong.
So a normie, which I don't think is quite what you're saying, but a
Probably
normie
not.
is someone who doesn't know that things are broken now.
Oh yeah, so that's not what
So
I'm
they
talking
think
about.
everything is like we went back to normal after COVID, and let's just move on.
Okay, that's not what I'm talking
Those
about.
are
Yeah,
normies.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but that's not what
I've
you're
heard
saying.
it normal. The new a normal. Well, the only point I'm trying to get at is you have this woke. I think that this wokeness is the new American religion. That's
Okay.
what I think, an ideology, but it's religious in nature. And so you have this spread out, and there's all these tentacles that come off of it. But what was, what was before? What's normal? What are we wanting to get back to that this is deviated from? What is a normal person? What is a normal
Well, I don't
societal life?
I don't think of normal as getting back to anything. So here's how I think about it.
Okay.
Because I don't think we can go back. Because if the train track you're on leads to the place we're at, you can't go back on the train track and start again and think you're going to end up anywhere except where we are now. So we have to plot a new course. But there are truths that we left behind that we do need to acquire. Okay, so that's not to say everything has to change. But there's something called the Overton window. Have you ever heard that phrase? Mm-hmm. So that's what I think of as normal, in the sense of this is what's an acceptable range of behavior within our culture. And
I can't embrace that though, because that's a subjective window.
yeah, no, and
Scripture
that's
gives
what I think
an
it is.
objective.
But the word normal just
so
means what people accept.
Normal in the
What people are used
Apaches
to.
was to steal horses.
Yeah,
But across the world, stealing was normal understood to be bad for society.
correct.
So I can't affirm the Apache value to steal a horse and call it normal. Overton window would say for the Apaches it is. I can't go there.
Yeah.
So
But-
I don't call that normal, even though they do.
Well, you're using the word normal differently then, because normal to me, in my just understanding of the word, is it's what you're used to.
It's the norms.
Yeah. So if you plot out human behavior on the bell curve, right, with extremes and outliers at the edges, you take that 2 standard deviations from the norm. That's going to be the 85% of the population. If you reach the edges, you're not normal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That may be an accurate way to say it. It wasn't what I'm after in the question, because you're letting subjectivity have its way, which is not necessarily bad, because there's an element of it is that, but that doesn't okay it. So we've left norms that are healthy, and we are now making normative behavior that's unhealthy. So I'm not after what is trying to be normalized today and call it okay, but it's deviant behavior.
Well, so this is
I'm
where I
after
think.
what is normal in the old sense that was not deviant.
So I think I would use the word healthy. What's normal is rarely a clear picture of health.
Okay, but in the lingo, normal is being used for healthy. We've left healthy,
Can you think of a
but
use? What's a use you're saying the lingo?
yeah, so it's often used in contrast with elites. You have the elites who are trying to run things that benefit them in ways that are self-serving, in ways that our Constitution didn't set up, da 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 da. And then you have flyover country, the normal people
Oh,
that
okay, okay.
are normals in a sense, as opposed to elites,
Yeah.
that they want to live life the way we had been living it for about 150 years in our country, with obviously upheaval moments.
Sure.
But by and large, our nation agreed that stealing isn't good, and that it was accepted as a nation, or
Yeah.
that lying, by and large, isn't a good thing. There's always been lying politicians, there's always been this and that.
People, yeah.
But they at least gave lip service that it was not good, but that's going away.
So populism as a political movement is kind of what I hear you describing.
Okay.
That like the normal people, the people who are just trying to live a good life, right? Which is really kind of the middle class, are the there's a goodness to that. There's a wholesomeness that's accepted in that. I think a lot of the political upheaval that we're facing is centered on the middle class, because if your poverty is such that you need a lot of government assistance, well, then you're going to go along with the government. And if your wealth is such that you don't need the normal or the majority to even help you because you're beyond that, well, now you can kind of do what you want. And so the people who resist letting the elites do what they want are the people in the middle. And so that's why you see economically, especially with COVID, the big ramification is on the middle class. It's middle class small businesses that are dissolved under COVID, while the massive corporations who employ the poor in jobs that they now can't get rid of because of their debt, because of their lifestyle, because of their pay, because of the cost of living has gone up. It's draining out the middle class down into the folks who need to keep their mouths shut so they can keep their job, which allows the people at the top to do what they're doing and what they want to do. Is that what you're saying? So
I'm not sure. I think I'm going to have to come back to this and think a little bit more on. I'm probably not scratching an itch, but I don't know if I can articulate better what the itch is.
Okay.
So I've been working on an idea of what is woke. I've been working through a meta kind of idea of woke, and that has brought me across the idea of, because I think woke is a viral distortion.
Well, and what
it's a weed.
From the perspective of someone who would, maybe 5 years ago or 3 years ago have called themselves woke, right? The folks who we call woke now no longer use that term, but that's how
they
terminology
don't wanna use
works,
it.
right?
Yeah.
But I think from their perspective, the normals are like the sheep who are just asleep.
Unawakened.
They're unaware, right?
Yeah.
Which is what woke means. I woke up from my sleep.
Yes.
Yeah. And then from the populist movement, it actually inverts that the woke are on the extreme, and we need to get back to, there's a couple of folks I follow who they post 80s Pizza Hut photos and this nostalgia of the America that we lost. As in, we need to get back to that aesthetic, back to those values, the simple life, the suburban middle class, right? I don't know if I agree with either one in particular. I think we need to chart a new course, as I've been saying.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking there's something here. We're losing. In the woke craze and its implications. I think we're losing a sense of, and maybe I'd go all the way back to this Tao or Ten Commandments or basic human beliefs that make for prospering in general. We're losing touch with that.
Yeah.
And
we've lost that. I think we've lost touch with that.
Well, I don't know that we have. I think that in America,
well, here's what I would say.
Majority haven't lost touch with that, but they don't have the levers of power.
I think we've lost touch with it in the sense that if you said, is stealing wrong, right? In the past, when we had touch with what you're kind of that theistic bedrock, you would say no because of the theism, because God exists.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas now it's
Okay.
something
I
is
agree
not
with you.
wrong or is
Yeah.
not right because it's normal,
Yes.
because it's within the Overton window. Therefore, that's what we
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
right? So if someone
Yeah.
says, "Well, is homosexuality wrong?" The same people who in 1990 said, "Well, it's wrong, but maybe now, no, it's great."
Yes.
Why did they change position over those 40
Yeah,
years or
yeah,
30 years?
yeah.
It's because the Overton window moved. Normal
Yeah,
moved, and I
yeah.
got to move with it. I don't want to hit the edge.
Yeah. 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 I've been thinking about that one, homosexuality in this subject of normal and woke, because what's being lost, I've noticed the argumentation of people who don't agree with this gay agenda or homosexuality. Very few of them are arguing that because I believe it's morally wrong.
Correct.
And so when they say, so I hear people that are in the normal category, the unwoke, anti-woke category, they'll use Saudi Arabia, for example. They'll say, well, see, they're putting to death gay people. And what they mean by that argument is that they're not refining it to say, I don't think gay people should be put to death. They are saying it in the sense that they're a nation that is no longer, they are not okay with a homosexual lifestyle as a legitimate lifestyle choice.
Right.
And I think that's the loss of a foundation. That's the loss of a rootedness and the ability to say, you don't have to, let's say you don't see it that way, you don't have to agree with me, but in a healthier, normal context, you would give me the right to have my perspective, as long as I wasn't mistreating somebody out of it.
So part of what I've heard this argument gone around enough about, can an atheist, for example, be a moral person? And I don't know why I've heard this example. I think Christians were using it to say morality's source is God.
Yes.
Therefore,
that's right.
the atheist says, well, I don't believe in God and I'm not
They
immoral.
don't have a source.
And the answer that I've come to in that debate is, individually, anyone can be moral. But if you're an atheist and you're moral, you're borrowing it.
Yes, that's right. It's
Right.
inconsistent with your
And
beliefs.
so a culture that's atheist would never be moral. But an atheist among Christians would usually
Well, there
be
would be
moral.
some moral things they would be, and some that they wouldn't.
Because it becomes
killing-
totally subjective.
Killing people because they made you upset on the freeway, they probably wouldn't end up going down that in the long run, because you wipe out your society. They'll have a practical basis upon which.
But abortion is killing your children.
I know.
Because they inconvenienced your career. and now our birth rates are negative. Right?
That's true.
From not negative, but they're so low that you can't sustain the population, and so the culture dies.
Yeah.
That's been happening in Europe for decades. It's
Well, let's
happening
say
in America.
Ricky
now.
Gervais, he's atheist.
Yeah.
He says he's atheist. He's thought through why he's atheist.
Right.
So he's an articulate atheist, let's say. I mean, and I can disagree with him, and he'll let me disagree with him. But he has a morality. He makes moral choices. Has certain things that are, and they come from something else for him. But I agree with you.
I don't
he's
think
borrowing.
they do. I think his morality comes from Christianity.
I agree with you.
He just has detached it.
Yeah.
Because here's what happens. Atheists raised in Christian society are moral without God, to the extent, right? They always have something that they rejected morality-wise, which is why they left God in the first place. And this is me assuming intent, but that's what the Bible says.
Yep.
And so then what happens, though, and what we're seeing happen, is their kids don't.
Yeah.
Their kids say, well, if you reject God's morality, I'll reject more things. And
That's right.
Every generation adds more of the moral frame is dissipated until you have very little.
Till it gets so unsustainable. That
Well, you've
they
got
cry
slavery,
uncle.
you've got classes, you've got people whose lives are less valuable.
Yeah.
And we're getting all that.
Yeah. Okay. You got anything else on your thing? We're probably.
I got a lot of things, but we're at an hour.
We're at an hour.
So we should call it?
No, do one of them.
Do one of them?
Yeah,
well,
do one of them. I still want to get to right to privacy, but we'll do it
we
next
didn't have time. That's right. You're going to have to come back next time, everybody. I would say one more. I'll do a quick one. So the manifesto that the Covenant shooter, the Covenant school in Nashville, the former student who was trans and she went into the school and shot.
Yeah.
In particular, targeted, it sounds like, the daughter of the pastor who was counseling her. So there was a very specific and aimed. So anyway, it looks like the parents of that school are pushing to keep that shooter's manifesto from being released.
Oh, it's the parents, huh?
It's the parents. And they
That's
have
interesting.
exerted enough pressure on the local law enforcement and maybe the FBI, who has it, I think, are going along with the parents' desires, even though the public is sort of calling for this manifesto.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the public, the conservatives, right?
Yeah.
I think the reason the conservatives are calling for it is they want to say, see, the trans ideology has created this murderous outcome.
Yeah.
What I heard the parents saying, and I was listening to a podcast, Sean Ryan, who's a former military guy who actually offered in the wake of that shooting, he offered his security expertise to evaluate the safety of the building and to advise them on how they could improve the structure and all that thing. So anyway, he said initially he was very much released the manifesto for the same reason. He talked to the parents, and now he says, I need to follow the wishes of the parents. And what the parents were saying is they've read this thing. They think releasing it would actually give not only ideological ammo for people to do more harm, but also specific strategic, like part of the manifesto is the strategies that she used, the planning to pull these kind of evil things off. And we don't want to put that everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is the conservative media, or all media, is fueled by extreme emotion. The more upset people get, the more they engage. The more they engage, the more clicks you get, the more ad revenue. And so your podcast keeps going. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not making people upset, we're not going to get.
I think there's another component to it, and that's the underdog mentality, the lesser than. So when you are in second place, you complain more. And so what happens with is that the media, they pick and choose when they want to trump up an act of evil. And if it's a conservative-looking person, or they try to make it conservative, they do it. But when it's one of their own, they try to conceal it. Yeah. And so what has happened to the second place folks is the conservatives. They say, well, you got to show them all. You got to show them. You got to be consistent. And that's an understandable sentiment. But ironically, that conflicts with another value. The media sensationalizes. And so somebody in Reno or Vegas and the shooter there, and they post these things. And then the conservatives start saying, why are we giving these guys a limelight?
Well, that is part of the big motivation, right? Is notoriety.
Yeah.
Motivates
so don't
these shooters.
do that. That's unhealthy. And
so
now,
why do the conservatives who are saying we don't want to give these shooters notoriety now are clamoring for this manifesto to be released?
That's because it's a clash.
Yeah. And I think
it's a clash of conflict.
I think they see within the manifesto a lever they could use to push on the other side.
I agree.
And so they're willing to let
go of the one value.
I think it's in
this moment.
I think it's a huge, I don't know if it's a hypocrisy, it's a blind spot.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's how fervent many of the voices are on our side of saying, well, we could get a political advantage, therefore it's worth it.
Do you think it would be healthier to say this? Hey, this should be publicized just like all the other ones are. What this manifesto, and then you get word, the parents have read this and it would not be healthy. And you, at some point, you have to say, all right, we just need to trust them on that.
I think if they could say, well, we could take excerpts and the conspiracy theories among us, the theorists,
that's the problem.
Is going to not believe, right? You redacted the good parts. But if you say, well, any part of this that speaks to motivation or ideology, we can make it clear. The problem is we all know what the ideology was that inspired all this. And it's blatant and it's open among activists in the trans movement.
Yeah.
That violence is a common supporting violence in the trans ideological movement, not among trans people, but in the movements, right? And among the activists, it's commonplace.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the manifesto is going to get us, except a couple of episodes of everybody's podcast will get more clicks. Yeah. And that's not worth it.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, we're 10 minutes past an hour. So I just want to say, if you're still listening, we appreciate you. And if there's something in this that we shared that you think, man, if someone else listened to this, it could really help them, would you post it? Would you share? I've talked to several people who said to me, I really like your podcast. And I said, oh, did you share it? Which is kind of putting somebody on the spot. But you see, they're like, oh, no, I guess I could. When I share things, it's because I think somebody's going to get helped by this. So if you think what we're doing would help somebody to think again, to have a balanced perspective, or even just to process something that matters, we ask you to share it, and that encourages us to keep going. So
That's true. But most importantly, think about things a few times before
Okay.
you just swallow it.
that's right. We're working on that final tagline, something about the antiviral mindset.
Yeah, we're not going to have swallowing in the final tagline.
No, that's all right. Until next time.